Today's daf is daf Yud Zayin. And if you recall, the Gemara told us a story here, which starts on Tez Zayin Amid Beis, about Rabbi Bar Chana, who was not feeling well, and the Chachamim went to visit him. And they asked him a question about a get that came from Medina Sayyam. And there were two shluchim that said b'fanei nechtam, b'fanei nechtam, and the question was, is that an absolute requirement? And the response that they got from Rabbi was very surprising. He said, you know what? Einom tzrichim. If two witnesses are here, they could have testified that she was divorced. How much more so can they believe to bring this get? And the get is kosher, they're two eidim. In the meantime, the Gemara says it happened to be the holiday of the Parsiim, in which case is an absolute law that prohibits lighting a candle. And unfortunately, a Parsi called Chabara on the top of Yud Zayin came along and caught them red-handed, so to speak, and took away their ner. And now their lives are a little bit in danger because they violated the idolatry of the Parsim. Omar, so Rabbi Bar Chana sends Rachmana. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Rachmana. Oh, Betulach, either take us under your shade, under your tzel, and protect us, give us shelter, and save us from the Parsim. Oh, or Betula Devar Esa, or will be protected by Bnei Esa. And Bnei Esav at that time gave kavod to the Chachmei Yisrael. So that the kavanah here of Rabbi Bar Chana was to say that as far as Edom is concerned, the gzera of Golus is just that they're going to prevent us from learning Torah. As the pasuk says, Vayok Asher Tarid ufarakta ulo mi'al tzavarecha. But now that we are learning Torah, then the Edomites will not be able to take from us this ner that allows us to continue. But other nations are very dangerous. So Gemara asks, L'meima de Romoi malu mi parsoi. Are you telling me, Rabbi Bar Chana, that you prefer the Bnei Esav above and beyond the Parsiim? The Romayim are the Bnei Esav. And now you tell me they're better than the Parsim, Batani Rabbi Chia. My Dechsiv. What is the meaning of the pasuk in Eov? Elohim hevin darka, v'hu yadas mekoma. Hashem understands the derech of Torah, and he knows where he should place us and settle us so that those who want to study and dedicate themselves to Torah would be able to do so. Yodei HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'Yisrael she'ein yecholim lekabel gzeres Romiim. In other words, when the Romans, meaning the Edomites, will institute gzeres of Shmad against Bnei Yisrael, enjoining the Jewish people from studying Torah and from fulfilling mitzvahs, ein Yisrael omdin. We cannot survive. We cannot overcome these gzeros. And therefore, Amad vehiglo sam lebavel. And this is during the period of Bayis Rishon, Churban Bayis Rishon, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu will send us to exile into Babylonia, where the Parsim was settled. So you see clearly from Rabbi Chia that the situation is just the reverse, that the Romoyim are worse than the Parsim. Lo kasha. Hamakami de Nesu Chabroi Lebavel, V'holabasa di Osu Chabari Lebavel. The Drush of Rabbi Chia addresses that period of history before the Parsim came to Bavel. Who was in control and had sovereign control over the land of Bavel? It was the Kasdim. It was Nebuchadnezzar. It was Avil Mirodach. It was Belshazzar. These were all people that were Nochim Yisrael, relative again to the Romoyim. But Rabbi Bar Chana, who dafka want the Romim, There were in a period after the Chabroi, the Parsim came to Bavel. And that took place when Korash, their king, conquered Bavel and ruled over Bavel. They were worse than the Romans. Okay, this is where we want to start for today. The Mishnah says, Echad omer b'fanei nechtav, u'shnayim omer b'faneinu nechtam, kosher. If one of the shluchim says b'fanei nechtav, and another two say b'fanei nechtam, then the Mishnah integrates these two testimonies, and the get is kosher. Omer Rabbi Ami, Omer Rabbi Yochanan lo shanu. When does the Mishnah validate the get? When only one shliach is saying b'fanei nechtav, and two are testifying b'fanei nechtam. Ella, that's only shaget yotzei b'tachas yad eid ksiva. When the aid that testified b'fanei nechtav is the shliach of the Baal, who is appointed to carry the get to the Isha and deliver the get, then the Rabbanan established that he is believed like two witnesses, and therefore the get is kosher. Denasu kishnayim. It's as if there were two witnesses al zel ksiva, and ukshnayim we actually have two witnesses testifying on the chasima. So that's great, because since the aid who is testifying for a nechtav is in fact a shliach, the Rabbanan upgraded his nemanos to the status of two eidim. Aval, in the case of mitachas yidei eidei achsima, if it's only the eidim who testify for a nechtav that are shluchei Baal, and they do not testify on the ksiva, that shliach who testifies on the ksiva is not a shliach at all. He was not given the get to transmit and transport the get to the Isha. Also, so even though we have two Eidim who are shluchim and they brought the get and they're testifying on the chasima, nevertheless, we still have a chash of shalol lishma. And this reflects the shita of Rabbah. We're not going to rely on one witness to testify that the get was written lishma, because this get is coming from Medina Sayyam, where they weren't Bikiyim b'lishma. And although a shliach is believed like Shnayim, that's because the Chachamim established that a shliach is given the status of two Eidim. But here, the one who's testifying on the Ksiv and the lishma is not a shliach. He doesn't have the status of two Eidim. He's like one Eid. Alma Kasavar, we see the Rabbi Yochanan, who requires that the Eidus on the Ksiva Saget be supplied by the shliach of the Baal, who is specifically appointed to carry the get. Rabbi Yochanan holds that even when we don't have any chash whatsoever, that the Baal will be ma'ar on the get and say it's mezuyaf, the testimony, the signatures are counterfeit. And the reason for that is because there are two witnesses that are testifying on the chasima and authenticating the chasimos. Is nevertheless, we need b'fanei nechtam, b'fanei nechtam. Shnayim sheviu get Medina Sayyam, and there's no chash that the Baal will tie him mezuyaf because these two witnesses are mitzuyim l'kaimo, so we have a kiyum get. Is tzrichim sheyomru b'faneinu nechtam, b'faneinu nechtam, which means that the chash of lishma is independent of the chash of chasima mizuyefes. And even if we have ample, reliable testimony with regard to the chasima, that's not sufficient. We need testimony of either two Eidim or of the shliach that the get was written lishma in the proper fashion. So now the Gemara asks the following kasha. Amalei Rav Asi turns to Rav Ami, and these were the great Talmidim of Rabbi Yochanan, Elameata. According to you, that Shnayim, who are Shluchei Baal, to bring the get, they still have to testify Fanei Nechtam, and it's not enough that they testify Fanei Nechtam. is Reisha. What do we do with the din that's brought down in the Mishnah a little bit earlier? The Katani, Shnaim Omer Fanenu Nechtav, the Echad Omer Fanai Nechtam, Pasul. The get is Pasul, and this is the sheet of the Chachamim, that if we will establish the veracity and the reliability of the get based on the one aid who says Fanai Nechtam, then it's possible because Asi Lechlufe and Shtars the Alma, Rabbi Yehuda Machshir. Now, according to your logic, so argues Rav Asi to Rav Ami, Vafilu get Yotzi Mitachas Yidei Shneim. If let's say 2 out of the 3 who carried the get were shluchei abal to bring the get, nevertheless pasli rabbanon, the rabbanon pasled, could that be when you have now 2 who are shluchim? And the Gemara answers, that's exactly the case. The Chachamim will pasel the get when 2 of them testify Fanei Nechtav, and only 1 is testifying Fanei Nechtav. Now the Gemara goes on now to discuss a different issue. Zimnin the Ashkeche, again, we're talking about Rabbi Asi and Rav Ami, the Yosef Amar. Rav Ami was giving a discourse about a get that is kosher, according to our Mishnah. And the case is that 1 aid testifies Fanei Nechtav, 2 testify Fanei Nechtam, Dafilu Haget Yotze Mitachas Yidei Eidei Achasima kosher. Even if the get is being carried by 2 Eidim who testify in the Chasima, and it was not sent through shlichus from the aid, the single aid, who's testifying on the ksiva, and yet the Mishnah says that the get is kosher. How could the get be kosher? Alma kasavar. Shnayim she'viu get mimdinas hayam. Ein tzrichim sheyomru b'fanei nechtav fanei nechtav. So we should interpret the Mishnah based on the principle that we don't need Eidus on the Ksiva. Eid Ksiva is not believed if he's not a Shliach, and yet the get is kosher. How could that be? It must be, but because 2 people are bringing this get, they don't need B'fanei Nechtam, Fanei Nechtam. Amalei Rav Asi. So Rav Asi says, Rav Ami Elame'ata, according to you, that you're of the opinion that if 2 people bring the get, they don't need to recite Fanei Nechtam. Fanei Nechtam is Reisha. In the previous din, the Ketani Shnayim Omer Fanenu Nechtav. So you have 2 testifying on the Ksivas, I get, the Echan Omer Fanei Nechtam, and only 1 aid on the Chasim, on the Chacham Pasel the get. Rabbi Yehuda Machshir. So let's be medayik in the Lashon HaMishnah, time of the reason why the Chacham Pasel the get in this particular scenario is because Ein I get Yotze Mitachas Yidei Shneim, that these were not appointed as the Shluchim to bring the get ha, implying that get Yotze Mitachas Yidei Shneim, if 2 who are carrying the get were appointed as Shluchei Baal by the Baal, is Machshir Rabbanan, the Rabbanan concede that the get is kosher. Amalei Rav Asi responds, or Rav Ami responds to Rav Asi, that's exactly the case. But yet, Rav Asi asks Rav Ami, Vazimnin lo amrit lan hachi, you didn't, on other occasions, you didn't say that. You told us that even in this case, the get is possible. Amalei, so Rav Ami responds, Yosed he shalot timot. What does that mean? Lashon zeh achnon shamarti. Take the last thing that I told you and rely on it. That if the get is yotze mitachas yeshneim, the Chacham can see that the get is kosher and don't even move from the spot as far as that's concerned. Okay. And now we're up to the Mishnah on the bottom of Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. This is the famous Mishnah of Zman the Gittin. Let me just check one thing out here before we go on. So I have a little bit of a problem here, but we'll see if after we finish this Amud and before we go on to Zayin Amud Beis, I'm going to have to take a 2-minute break, I think, to solve a problem. Because of the Masechet. Okay, fine. So Mishnah Paskins the following. Nichtav bayom v'nechtam bayom. So this is a perfectly valid get in which the ksiva and the chasima were on the same day. However, balayla, if let's say the get was written at night, v'nichtam balayla, okay, that's also fine. Balayla v'nechtam biyom, or it was written at night and signed in the day kosher, because in all these cases, both the ksiva and the chasima took place on the same day. However, what happens if by yom, if it was written during the day, v'nechtam balayla, so the get has the date of the yom at the time of the ksiva, but yet it wasn't signed until the night, which is the next day al pi din, possible. According to Tanakama, the get is possible. Why? Because now we have what's called a get mukdam, in which the date of the get written on the get is earlier by 1 day than the time of the chasima. And this Mishnah would seem to reflect the shita that Eidei Chasima Karsa. Rabbi Shimon Machshir. Why? Shahay Rabbi Shimon Omer Kol HaGittin Shenichtavu Bayom V'Nechtemu Balayla Sulim. Although in other shtaros, and the word Gittin here refers to other shtaros bi'alma, like for example, Rashi gives Shtar Mecher, or Shtar Matana, Shtar Alva. In all those cases, a Shtar Muchtav is possible. And the Gemara is going to explain why. But Chutz Gittin Nashim, the exception to that rule is Gittin Nashim. Now take a look at Rashi, Dibra Maskal Bayom, V'Nechtam Balayla, Muktam Hu, Demashma, Demeahu Yomi Garsha. The Zman is made on the time of the Gerushin. And in this case, the Gerushin did not take place until the following day. And the Gemara is going to explain, Rashi says, my psule. Now, this entire requirement of Zman in a get is only D'Rabbanan. And we're going to have machlokas now between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish as to why D'Rabbanan established that a get has to have a zman on it. On a doraisa level, as soon as she takes out the get and she has Adam signed on the get, that itself would be proof that the get is kosher. And you wouldn't have to raise any other sfekas about whether it's muktam or mu'uchar because she's holding on to the get. But the Rabbanan, for one of two possible reasons, will passel the get if there's no zman, or I shouldn't say if there's no zman, or even if there is a zman, but the zman is muktam. Itmar, mipnei ma tiknu zman begittin. What was the reason why they established zman in a get? Is it a din of Mammon or is it a din of Arayos? Rabbi Yochanan says it's a din of Arayos. And therefore, Rabbi Yochanan says that despite the fact that this shtar, this get, is not what you call a monetary collection, a shtar guvaina, which means that if it's mukdam, you're going to be collecting against the lekucho shalok yedin, as we'll see. But nevertheless, there's a problem of shemi yechap al basa choso. What does that mean? A man is married to his niece. He's allowed to marry his sister's daughter. And if chas v'sholom, she had znus tachtov, he's going to give her a get, and he is going to predate the get to save her from misas chenet. Or alternatively, instead of predating the get, he will give her a get without any zman on it. When two Eidim come to testify in Beis Din against her that she had znus, she'll take out the get and she'll claim she was already a grusha and a pnuya before she had this relationship with another man. And in order to guarantee that he won't be mechapa, now keep in mind, this is for all marriages, not just the marriage of one's niece, but the Gemara is giving Rabbi Yochanan is giving a prominent example in which a person might be motivated to do so. Reish Lakish says, no, the issue is guvaina. We're talking about a monetary issue. That's called peros, mishum peros. And if you take a look at Rashi, Rashi says, she mizmana get v'elech. Let's say the Baal, after the get, will sell what's called nichsei melug, right? What's nichsei melug? These are the nechasim that she brought into the marriage. And the Baal has the right to eat the peros, and he can sell them on the open market. And if there's no zman, he's going to continue selling the peros illegally, even after the gerusha, because there's no zman on the get. And if she'll sue him in a court of law, saying that he absconded with peros that belonged to her because these peros were post-gerushin, then she won't be able to win that case because Hamotzi Mechavel of Araya, and he has the get. And he's going to claim that the get was much later. And that when he sold the peros, he still had rights to the peros. And at this point, the Gemara is going to analyze the machlokes between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Why is it that Reish Lakish rejected Rabbi Yochanan, and why, in the reverse, did Rabbi Yochanan reject Reish Lakish? Now, we have a principle called znus lo shchia. And this is the basic premise of Reish Lakish, that znus is not shchia. And therefore, to make a takana for that case that a woman had this extramarital relationship doesn't make any sense. It's not justified. That's the Shita Reish Lakish. So it's going to be simple to understand Reish Lakish, my time below Rabbi Yochanan. That makes sense. But on the flip side, why Rabbi Yochanan rejected Reish Lakish, that's a little bit more difficult because, you know, this kind of achiras peros is certainly something we should be concerned with, something shkir.